Hi, everyone. This is another episode on the Sabbath as a teaching that can be given in the weekly service of the Yeshua Words Only PowerPoint. And if you download this lesson will be in there and you can use it for your own teachings. Anyway, so the issue of this particular episode, part 2, is did God allow a false prophet to test Gentiles whether they would disobey Acts 15's clear expectation that Sabbath would be obeyed? So first, let us go and do a deeper dive on what the word test means there, and why is that a question we need to be concerned about as Gentiles? Did God allow something to happen in our canon that is there only to test us, not for us to trust it? Okay, that can happen. Now, did you know there's a passage in the New Testament that is deliberately there to remind us that God could allow a test of us, and then we have to ask God to help us pass that test? Do you know where it is? Well, I don't think you do because most translations don't tell you what it really says or what it most likely says. So this is the Our Father that Yeshua taught us, and we can see here I've highlighted in red a couple of things that are varied from what you're typically used to. Tomorrow is actually a legitimate variant there on give us this day our bread for tomorrow. That was what Jerome said. He realized it really was when he studied Greek. When he studied the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew in Caesarea. And then he made that comment in his commentary on Matthew. So there's one of those things where it's just in English. There was uncertainty, but he resolved that, and for some reason it didn't get communicated to King James, but it does mean that. Now, another word that's similar to this is where it says, "And do not lead us into the hands of temptation." That's how it usually is translated. Well, that would suggest that God would actually tempt us. So please do not tempt us. So that God doesn't tempt anyone to do evil. So that's not the answer. The answer is God does allow, though, a test to do something. And so now I want to talk about that. Can I prove to you that word there means test? Okay, so now let's take a look at the word there for test in Greek. Let's see. Now it's the word parasmos. Temptation is the way it's translated most of the time. And this is Matthew 6:13 if you want to look it up. And this is the Mount C transliteral. I recommend we use this all the time to see what's going on. Now, when you go to the left, parasmos, he says, can mean a putting to the proof or trial, meaning a test. Others times it can mean a direct temptation to sin. Is God going to put you do we have to pray to God, do not give us a direct temptation, like as if he's going to give it to us? God does not directly tempt us to do evil, okay, but he does test us to see whether we would be duped by false people who are themselves doing evil. God just allows them, and he does this to test you, not that he sends them, but he tests you. So the other meaning is trial or temptation. You see there. So the right answer here is because God does not bring us temptations. It's not his goal, but he does allow us to be tempted. And so he didn't send this test we're sending you. He didn't tell a person to bring you false messages. He allows it to happen to test you. Now, let's see where that is in the Bible. Where does the Bible talk about this? Well, it's right here in Deuteronomy 13:1-4. This is usually called the passage about apostasy. And the word apostasy is actually of Greek origin, but a Hebrew word here was translated as apostasy in the Greek Septuagint translation of the Bible in the 257 approximate time period before the time of Christ. So I'm going to read this to you real quick. Well, I'll read it slowly. If there arise among you a prophet or a dreamer of dreams and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign and wonder come to pass. What does that mean? So they give you a miraculous sign. They've healed someone. They've raised someone from the dead. Doesn't matter. Or there's a serpent that bites their leg or their arm and they don't die. All these are signs and wonders. Are you supposed to be always accepting a sign and wonder or always confirm someone is true? No. God allows it as a test. And they're not using God's power. They're using another power. That's my opinion. Obviously, God wouldn't give them the power, but they can get the power from the demonic world. So you have to make that decision. Where do they? If they violate this, they're not getting this power from God Yahweh. He doesn't send us temptations; He allows them, and therefore there has to be a different force behind these kinds of signs and wonders. Prophets who give signs and wonders, and what they say is going to happen does happen. Let's continue. And the sign or wonder come to pass, and whereof he spake unto you, saying, let us go after other gods, which thou hast not known, and let us serve them. Now, you're going to say, well, you all know I'm going to apply this to Paul, so I'll just go right there. So you're going to say, well, Paul didn't teach us another God. Absolutely did. Colossians 1:15-18 is beyond doubt. The Father creates the Son. He says Jesus is the first begotten of all creatures of the Father. That's verse 15. Then he says, turns around in verse 16, it says, and then Jesus created all of creation. He made all things. And he says it twice, not once. And then he says all things were created by him. And in the first instance, he says Jesus created all things. There's no doubt that Jesus is a kind of God who has supernatural powers all by himself, even though he's a created prototokos, even though he's a first tokos in Greek meaning firstborn. He is a firstborn of all creatures. That's what it says. Nobody likes it. But then he says Jesus turned around and he's the creator. Do you know that who that means? Is our Father? Our Father is not God Yahweh. Our Father is Jesus, according to Paul. So we have an episode where we show Paul is contradicting Jesus, who says, I'm returning to my Father and your Father. So Jesus believes his Father is the same as our Father. So Jesus doesn't believe he's our Father. Paul believes Jesus is our Father because he created all things. Yahweh only made Paul says Yahweh, the Father, only made Jesus, only sired Jesus. And he became his first begotten, prototokos, first begotten. It's proto is first, tokos is begotten son. It's actually what it means. Childbirth is actually tokos. So even if you don't know this, we're going to see there's another criteria. Just simply teaching contrary to God's law is enough to violate this command. But this is the example God first gives in verse 2 of how you violate it. So Paul violates that too in Colossians 1, verses 15-18. We've discussed that in other episodes online. Verse 3, and you see here, I just want to say here, if you compare Colossians 1:15 versus Isaiah 44:24, you can see the direct contradiction. Isaiah 44 has Yahweh saying that I alone, with no one assisting me, Yahweh, that's his name, and you have to see it in the WEB Bible, the only one that shows you consistently the name Yahweh wherever it appears. The 6,852 times it appears and is covered up in the Protestant and Catholic Bibles with the word Lord. That's to fool you. They deliberately do that to their advantage, which is to make Jesus look like when he's called Lord, it's the same thing as when we called Yahweh Lord, and it's not. The Lord is a cover-up term for 6,852 times in your Bibles. It's not really there. So you have to strip it away. And then God, Yahweh says, I alone created the heavens and earth. That means Yahweh is our Father, not Jesus. But Colossians 1:15 says, Paul says, our God is truly Jesus. He's our Father, not Yahweh. So there's the direct contradiction. Then verse 3, thou shalt not hearken unto the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams, for the Lord Yahweh your God proves you to know whether you love the Lord Yahweh your God with all your heart and with all your soul. So what does this word prove mean? Well, it's the same meaning of the word test in Our Father. Directly is exactly what we're praying, that please do not have us go into the hands of a test. But if we are forced to go into the hands of a test, what are we praying? But even if so, keep us free of all evil. So therefore, if you do allow us to suffer a test, please do not let us fall into evil. Do not let us fail that test. Let us pass that test. And the commandment of God, you'll see in Deuteronomy 13, is do not listen to that prophet. So that's where we fall. When we listen to the false prophet who teaches us of another God or gives us signs and wonders to mislead us to turn away from God's law, you'll see that's coming next, then we should be turning away from that person. Otherwise, we're being disobedient to God Yahweh. Now, I want to take a little deeper dive on Deuteronomy 13 about the word here for testing. So this is the BibleHub.com dictionary, or I should say their interlinear dictionary that goes with each word. So you can see here from 13.3 of Deuteronomy 13, it's translating the word here as testing instead of proving in the King James. So the word is more appropriately test, which matches what I showed you here in the New Testament. This word properly can be translated and should be translated not as temptation, which makes no sense. God doesn't tempt us, but God does allow testing, and that is okay. And therefore, that gets us back to the Deuteronomy test, is what Jesus is saying. You want to pray God does not put you in the position where you're being tested and allowing these things, but then you pray, even if so, I pray that I won't fail that test. I will not fall into evil. And this is how it's reasoning full context. That for the Yahweh is testing Yahweh your God is testing you to know whether you love Yahweh your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. So that is the way God does that. He tests you whether you love Him by allowing false prophets. And I want to show you really up close. The word in for testing is manasseh. That may be important as we continue. All right. So there's the word proveth. It ties directly into the word manasseh, which means is testing. All right. It doesn't mean prove. I mean, unless prove means testing, it's not the right word. Basically, when you answer a question, you prove the answer is X. Does that mean you've been tested? You're just proving something that you already know is true. But a test means something that you're not sure, and you have to use the criteria that Yahweh is going to give you. So I'm going to show you now what the criteria isn't just simply they teach you another God like Paul does teach in Colossians 1:15-18. So there's one more test that he's going to explain. God, Yahweh will explain. So what I've done is I'm going to now quote verses 5-10, which you haven't heard yet. And I did verses 1-4 in the King James, but I get tired of having to tell you the word Yahweh is there. So the world English puts Yahweh wherever it exists in the 6,853 times it's suppressed in all the other Bibles, except the Young's Literal uses Jehovah, but that to me I don't think is correct. Anyway, let's listen, continuing to listen and see what other criteria God uses to determine what you're to do. That prophet or that dreamer of dreams shall be put to death because he has spoken rebellion. The word apostasy in Greek would be right there. Against Yahweh your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you out of the house of bondage, to draw you aside out of the way which Yahweh your God commanded you to walk in. So you see, here's actually a second issue, is the reason God doesn't want you to have someone claiming another God instead of himself exists is because it's going to draw you away from him exclusively. Okay. So he doesn't want you to have another God, obviously, but it also is he doesn't want to have you being drawn away outside of the way which Yahweh your God commanded you to walk in. So the 10 Commandments had been existing as of this time. I believe it was in a few chapters earlier in Deuteronomy. I think it's 4. So that's why this is a second ground. In other words, apostasy became to primarily be understood as rebellion from God's law. People who would teach you not to follow God's law is as if it doesn't exist or was given by angels or some other frivolous ground to dismiss God's law, whatever it was, that makes them an apostate from Moses, is what the expression would be called. Let's continue. If your brother, the son of your mother, or your son, or your daughter, or the wife of your bosom, or your friend who is as your own soul, entices you secretly, saying, Let's go and serve other gods, which you have not known, you nor your fathers, of the gods of the peoples who are around you, near to you or far off, from the one end of the earth even to the other end of the earth, you shall not consent to him nor listen to him. Pause right there. The words "you shall not consent to him nor listen to him" mean you shall not obey anything he says. And it doesn't matter if sometimes he says things that are consistent with Yahweh. That doesn't prove he's from Yahweh. It's what is inconsistent with Yahweh that proves he's not from Yahweh. And that's what you need to test people by. Not, hey, how many times does Paul say anything consistent with Yahweh? Oh, then he's from Yahweh. No. How many times does he say things contrary to Yahweh? That's how we test him. You can't test people by trying to find things that a wolf in sheep's clothing is going to have the sheep's clothing covering him, concealing his true nature from you most of the time, but the wolf in him is going to pop out from time to time. And it's the wolf verses, the wolf voices, where Paul says, by my lie, if God's glory is advanced, why am I still called a sinner? That's in Romans 3, verse 7. This is somebody that says things that Jesus would never endorse and could not. And yet people believe this is the word of God. So I'm digressing here. So what else? Your eye shall not pity him, meaning in this command to not listen and therefore kill this person. And of course, Paul's already passed on, but in the sense spiritually, you need to drive him out of your heart because he's not from God Yahweh. He's not speaking the words of Yah. Neither shall you spare, neither shall you conceal him. So don't make a cover up. Don't make excuses for him. If they're legitimate, of course, but if they're not, if they don't make sense, if they're not true, don't try to find things for this guy. Somebody who tells you I've captured you with guile is a person who's completely at odds with Jesus, because even as it says in, I think it's the book of Revelation, that in his mouth was no guile. And actually, that might be in Peter. But you shall surely kill him. Your hand shall be. Now listen how much God wants to make the community join in this act of killing this person. That's important. Why would God do that? Because everybody has to know this is so evil. We need to all kill him over and over again. Listen, your hand shall be first on him to put him to death. So you should rush to be at the front of the line to be the first one to put it in there. Don't be at the back of the bus and waiting to see how many people are going along. You need to decide what's right and wrong in your own head and move forward to take this in your hands. You shall be the first to put him to death, and afterwards the hands of all the people. You shall stone him to death with stones because he has sought to draw you away from Yahweh your God. So there's the principle of apostasy again. The real point of God Yahweh is the false prophet telling you things that will draw you away from following Yah. If he does that, that puts that person in the category of a false prophet who has to be killed in the law under Moses. So now I'm going to read you an article, not an article, a comment I responded to someone who said Romans 14 does not declare, Paul does not say the Sabbath is abolished, and he contends Paul never does that, and Paul's very law adherent and so on. So I'm going to respond to that, and in the course of this, you're going to hear the proof, and therefore I don't have to do a lot of slide presentations, just take what I wrote Jeremiah. Hi, Jeremiah. You say that Romans 14 is not about Sabbath. Please convince all the Protestant and Catholic leaders before you came along. You are incorrect, regardless of their opinion. It is a good idea to post quotes of the passage because you would have self-corrected yourself. I'm sure if you just read the passage. The Romans 14, 5-6 passage, KJV reads, one man esteems one day above another. Another esteems every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. He that regards the day regards it unto the Lord. He that regards not the day to the Lord, he does not regard it. He that eats to the Lord, for he gives God thanks, and he that eats not to the Lord, he eats not and gives God thanks. Now, Christian scholar J. Donnelly says this passage means, particularly verse 6, Paul single-handedly abolished the Sabbath. He says, quote, St. Paul proclaimed the end of the Sabbath, Romans 14:6. Jean Donnelly, Bible and Liturgy, Light and Life, 1956 at 228. Peter Ditzel confesses from a Pauline approving perspective, quote, let's face it, Paul makes no exception. He says it is perfectly acceptable to esteem every day alike, which is the same as esteeming no day in particular. He gives no hint whatsoever that either the seventh day or the first day are exceptions to what he's saying. Peter Ditzel, What is the Christian Sabbath? Part 4. I have a video in my pastor monitoring series where the pastor defends that the Sabbath is done away in Romans 14. So I could give that link to anybody if you want it. This intent matches the explicit statement against Sabbath in Colossians 2, verses 16-17. Verse 16, let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of a holiday or of a new moon or of the Sabbath days, which are shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ. Christian commentators explains this means regarding Sabbath, quote, Christians are permitted to make up their own minds about a special day. That's Dan Corner, a very well-regarded commentator online, and he has several books. 6 Facts for Saturday Sabbatarians to Ponder, and this is his evangelicaloutreach.org is his website. He does have a lot of good things there, but sometimes a clock is right one time every 24 hours, right? A broken clock is right every 24 hours. And I don't mean that they were disparaging. I really like a lot of what he writes. I'm just saying it just doesn't prove that you're right on one thing, doesn't mean you're right on everything. Okay. Luther, in a sermon entitled How Christians Should Regard Moses, given August 27, 1525, says of this passage of Colossians, again, one can prove it from the third commandment that Moses does not pertain to Gentiles and Christians. For Paul, Colossians 2, verse 16, Luther citing, abolished the Sabbath to show us that the Sabbath was given to the Jews alone, for whom it is a stern commandment. Martin Luther, in an article, How Christians Should Regard Moses, this is in Luther's Works, Word and Sacrament, Philadelphia, 1960, volume 35, pages 161 to 174. But I found it over here at Martin Luther's Basic Theological Writings, Lull and Russell, Fortress Press, 2005, at 127. Calvin also wrote on Colossians 2:16, quote, we see now that the Sabbath is done away with and the people are free from it. John Calvin, Commentaries on the Epistle of Paul, the Apostle to the Philippians, Colossians, and Thessalonians, translated by Pringle, 1948, 191. I did find that online. Calvin added that this passage, you go to books.google.com to find that, by the way. Calvin added that this passage in Colossians meant, quote, Christ has been, by his death abolished the observance of rites, i.e. Sabbath. As to Galatians, you claim I am entirely wrong that this involves the Sabbath. However, you need to pay attention to Paul's condemnation of the Galatians for reverting to the, quote, law given to angels by a mediator to observe, quote, days, seasons, and new moons. Here is the sum up Paul gives in Galatians 4, KJV, verse 7. Wherefore thou art no more a servant but a son, and if a son, then an heir of God through Christ. Verse 8. Howbeit then, when you knew not God, you did service unto them, which by nature are no gods. Note he's talking about the angels who gave the law via mediator. They're not God, right? Per Paul in Galatians 3, verse 19. Verse 9, but now after you have known God, or rather are known of God, how turn you again to the weak and beggarly? And this is translated in English as elements, but Vincent says very clearly in his commentary on this verse that it means in Greek angels. The angels controlled elements, and so the translation as elements was mistakenly applying what they control rather than who they were controlling it. So angels. So you now turn again to the weak and beggarly angels. Who were they? The ones who gave the law through a mediator named Moses up here. Okay, that's what you got to put all this together, and that's in Galatians 3:19, where he calls it says it was given by angels. And then this is key, my friend, and this is I'm speaking to you all out there that he didn't see. Verse 10: You observe days and months and times and years. I'm afraid of you, lest I have bestowed upon you a labor in vain. So Paul's condemning the Galatians for observing days, meaning Sabbath days are included, months, times, and years. Bart Ehrman, just reading the text as it reads, explains Paul is absolutely clear in Galatians that he thinks non-Jews, meaning Gentiles, are not to do these things, that is, keep Sabbath, holidays, etc., once they believe in Christ. In fact, he lays a curse on anyone who thinks that Gentiles who come to believe in Jesus should engage in such practices. Bart Ehrman, Peter, Paul, and Mary Magdalene, and that's 2006 at 117. Do mainstream Christian commentators disagree with Barterman? Well, no, they're absolutely in accord with him. See BibleHub.com, commentaries, Galatians 4:10. Press the tab commentary, and then you'll see this, and you'll find the very first thing that comes up is Ellicott. And I could go through them all. They all agree. The first list of commentaries says the word observe, and this is important. Pay attention to this. This is a compound word in Greek signifying not only to observe, but to observe scrupulously. That's key because it's a translation from Hebrew of something. Okay, so let's let him continue. Ellicott continues. The word is used by Josephus in his paraphrase of the fourth commandment, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, Antiquities 3.5, I guess that'd be book 5, section 5, or okay. But anyway, it's in Josephus. So when that commandment of God is summarized by Josephus, he uses this word to mean observe scrupulously when he's talking about the Sabbath command. So that's what it means. It's to keep it holy in Hebrew, converted into Greek as zealously keep this day, observe it scrupulously. Continuing with the quote from Ellicott. So Ellicott says days, i.e., in the first instance, and especially the Jewish Sabbaths, but other fasts or festivals which occupied a single day may be included. So he knows what the words mean when it says days, Sabbath days, months, times, and years. And of course, in context, Paul's saying the law was a tutor. You need to get away from it. Why do you want to be in bondage again to those who are no gods and are weak and celestial beings? That's what Paul's talking about. He's saying the law was not given by Yahweh. It was given by angels who are weak and beggarly celestial beings. Why do you want to be in bondage to them again? That's what it's saying, my friends. Pure blasphemy, pure apostasy, I should be more correct. So Jeremiah 16:19 project, that's what I'm writing. Please compare truth against your claim. Quote, you claim he told the Galatians they were foolish for keeping the Sabbath and the feast. Let me back up here. Jeremiah 16, verse 19 project is saying, this is me. This is my fault. Doug, you claim he told the Galatians they were foolish for keeping the Sabbath and the feast. That statement does not exist. You do that a lot. Yes, I go to the scholars. I learn the word observe there. Doesn't mean what you think it means. It means to observe scrupulously, which is a quote out of Josephus about the fourth commandment, about observe the Sabbath to be holy, meaning zealously hold on to it. So you just jump to conclusions. You don't research. You come at me and you say, I'm wrong when you are completely rejected by every scholar, every reader who knows Greek and who knows the context and knows the historical background in the community. How the fourth commandment was described by Josephus can't be ignored. So I conclude and I tell him, you should now concede Paul contradicts Torah on Sabbath repeatedly. The way of salvation for Gentiles in Isaiah 56, verses 6 to 7 was robbed for generations of Gentiles, thanks to Paul. Blessings, Doug. So let's take a look again at what we showed you in part 1 about Isaiah 56, verses 6 to 7, so we can understand the extraordinarily bad consequences it was for people to have not tested Paul, despite the fact he's clearly contradicting the Ten Commandments, within which is the Sabbath command, and he's telling people not to obey it. And in fact, he's calling them foolish for doing so, and he's excoriating them for believing in those who are no gods. Think about that, ladies and gentlemen, and are weak and beggarly angels, celestial beings who gave the law to a mediator, meaning Moses in Galatians 3:19. He's insulted the law. And another thing we all need to know, Galatians actually is Paul's first epistle. Why do you think they put it in the third position instead of in the first position? They usually, you put everything in chronological order because they want you to see Romans first, which is toned down, and you don't see it. Paul's saying, well, you can observe whatever day you want. It doesn't matter. It's up to you to make up your own mind. That seems a lot worse. It's harder to dissect that, right? You got to piece it together. But this is, when you read Galatians, it's so grossly belligerent and in your face that God, Yahweh, didn't even give the law to Moses. That's the problem here. That's clear apostasy. So now let's take a look at the commandment in God's word in Isaiah 56 that Paul did not know about. Was necessary for the Gentiles to keep Shabbat. That Paul, the self-styled apostle to the Gentiles, that was rejected, by the way, in Acts 15. It was verse 6, I believe, as Peter says, long ago, the Holy Spirit chose me to be the apostle of the Gentiles. So Peter is the apostle of the Gentiles, not Paul, but that's a whole other matter. But you see, Paul doesn't know the gospel to the Gentiles. This is it right here. Isaiah 56, verses 6 and 7, talking about how Gentiles are going to go into the holy mountain. And that's mentioned here on verse 7. I'll bring to my holy mountain. How are they going to be saved? Also, the sons of the stranger, meaning Gentiles, that join themselves to the Lord, Isaiah 56, verse 6, to serve him and to love the name of the Lord, to be his servants, everyone that keeps the Sabbath from polluting it and takes holds of my covenant. The covenant is usually means the 10 words, the 10 commandments, because if you think about the word or expression, Ark of the Covenant, you should know that inside the Ark of the Covenant were the 2 tablets of stone given to Moses on Mount Sinai, and that means the 10 commandments. That's what Friedman says in the commentary on Torah. That's what he interprets this term to mean in the Torah, the word covenant, in this special sense. And then verse 7, even them I will bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifice shall be accepted upon mine altar, for mine house shall be called the house of prayer for all people. Now, people sometimes say they want to question that last part. Oh, well, then this can't be in the future. Yes, it is. God is saying in Isaiah 11 about this coming to the holy mountain. He's going to say, he's going to say, there's no more killing of animals. Okay, just so you know, it's right here in chapter 11. The wolf will live with the lamb and so on. The young goat, young lion, they all can live together happily, and a little child will lead them. And then in verse 9, it says there will be no more hurt nor they will not hurt nor destroy on all my holy mountain. So what's going on here is when we get to the holy mountain issue, which is salvation in the millennial kingdom, things have changed. There's no more killing of animals by themselves, predator type things, and nor will we kill them anymore. Well, and how do we have a burnt offering? Well, it's right here in Leviticus 2, chapter 14, verse 16. World English shows it very clearly. It's the last line is important. Is an offering made by fire to Yahweh? What is? Oh, grain offering. This grain offering is described as a burnt offering. So burnt offerings are not exclusively of animals. So once we know the premise of the assumption that people have is that it has to always be burnt offerings is not true, of animals is not true, because in this era, the time period of the holy mountain that is in the future, salvation, millennial kingdom, the New Jerusalem, whatever you want to call it, there will be no more animals killing each other, and the child will lead them. It's so there's no danger anymore for a child to stand with the animals. They won't predate. They won't kill us, and we won't. It seems to me what it says, they will not hurt nor destroy on all my holy mountain, means we're not going to kill animals anymore. That's how I read it. That's how many people read it too. And then as a result of that, you can have burnt offerings of grain. That's how people are going to live the way they lived before Noah was given permission to eat meat. If you don't remember, no one was eating meat until the time of Noah, when all the animals and plants and everything were killed. There was no food there was no plants, no nutrition. So what has he got? He's got these animals on his ark. The only thing he can live off of are the animals. There's no vegetation anymore. It's all been destroyed in a huge worldwide flood. All right, so that ends this part 2, and I'll give you a preview of part 3. The title will be, Did the 12 Learn Paul Unilaterally Abolish Sabbath? We just saw he did that. Did the 12 approve Paul's anti-Sabbath position? Would they? Could they? All right, we'll see. God bless. Take care. Ciao. Bye.